Welcome back to Research Methods. This week we'll be tackling qualitative research, which usually begs the question, why do we care about research designs that don't have a numerical value that we can manipulate, variables that we can manipulate, and then have very firm answers out of? Qualitative research is this really unique zone where we're actually more trying to discover what's already out in the world instead of trying to answer specific questions. It allows for a lot more naturalistic discovery of phenomenon. Um, and it's very kind of complicated and wishy-washy in some ways, but very helpful in others. So we're going to dive right in with a shorter lecture than average. So qualitative research is not quantitative research, which means we don't really have specific variables that we are controlling for, manipulating, or kind of creating this atmosphere or this testable experiment kind of situation or scenario. We're actually going to the part in the world, the natural setting where a lot of these phenomena are occurring, and we're studying them in their own context. The studies will look vastly different than what we've been talking about so far in this class, and they'll look very different to most of what you'll read because quantitative research tends to answer those quick questions that we have about what's going on in the world, where qualitative research usually ends with just more questions. But it is still incredibly valuable. And it's really important for areas that are just under-researched or people groups that are under-researched. Or if there's a collection of quantitative research that is not really finding a lot of application or replicability out in the world, qualitative research can get to the bottom of why those problems might be happening. So let's start with a quick definition. Qualitative research is a method where researchers gather detailed information, conversations, observations, lived experiences, and analyze it to find patterns, themes, or deeper understandings. Right? There's four major categories to know. Right? Phenomenological, which is a big word to say phenomenons, right? Where we're trying to zoom in and just focus on one kind of phenomenon or people who've experienced that kind of phenomenon. Number two is grounded theory, where we just take broad sweeps of populations, asking broad questions, asking big interview questions, open-ended questions, and then analyzing all of those results to see if something bubbles up on its own, right? Instead of coming to this population with a hypothesis, we let the hypothesis come from the population almost in a way. But that's grounded theory because it starts from the ground up, inductive reasoning, right? And then number three is ethnographic, where we find an ethnicity or a population that's tighter knit culturally. And we ask questions about what's it like to be in your ethnographic group? What's it like to be in your group? What's the day in, day out? What's the cultural norm? Are there any like social norms that we're unaware of? And it helps kind of bridge gaps between why research might be happening well in one place but not in another place. Because if you're researching one group, it might not cross all the way over to the other group very well. And an ethnographic qualitative study would get you started as to finding out why. And then, of course, number four is case study. This is usually about experiences that people have that one or two people have shared, that we're just doing this incredible deep dive into one case, the other three can be very large population groups or very small population groups, but case studies are often incredibly small or even individuals only. So without further ado, let's go diving into each one of these four qualitative research studies and ask what they might kind of look like out in the real world. The first one up is phenomenological, which is a big word and it's a fun one to impress your friends with. So right here, let's start with the definition. Phenomenological qualitative research is Best understood like this: to understand how people experience something in their daily lives, or something in their weekly lives, or their monthly lives, something routine, something routine. Research, this is an example I pulled from another textbook. A researcher wants to learn what it's like to be a first generation college student. So they interview several first generation college students and ask them, what's it like being you? What's it like being you amongst your family? What's it like being you amongst your friends? But what's it like for you to have your own internal experience? How are you at perceiving things? And things like that. So the researcher then looks for common ideas between each interviewee. They look for things like, oh, a couple people mentioned feeling overwhelmed, or very proud, or kind of lost, or incredibly motivated. And these different pieces, kind of all springing up from different interviews, then gives us an idea of what we can study further in the future. Right? So phenomenological is this person is experiencing a phenomenon. They are the first generation, first person in their family to go to college. What's that like for them? What's that like for them? So the interview has a lot more open questions. And then after enough interviews, we can kind of see if there's anything springing up on its own that is occurring within this population. Grounded theory is very similar to this phenomenological where we're just watching to see if things spring up on their own from the bottom up. Phenomenological is much more focused on a group of people experiencing the same phenomenon. But grounded theory is just trying to create a better working explanation for new theories, trying to connect phenomenon to one another. Remember that the word theory itself is talking about how do we tie one phenomenon to another in a way that makes coherent, logical, narratival sense, like storytelling. Can we tell a story here in a way that makes sense? So grounded theory studies are less about a specific phenomenon and much more about, can we start seeing how one phenomenon ties into another phenomenon in the lived experience. So you can see it right there in the definition: to create a new explanation or theory based on vast amounts of data collected. Some research study, this is another example I want to look at real quick. A researcher studies how people balance working from home and their personal life. They interview many workers and look for patterns in their answers. As they collect more and more data, they begin to build theories out of that data. So phenomenological, much more about interviews. Here in grounded theory, we can ask more number-driven questions as well as interviews, right? So we can start asking things about, like, how do you set your schedule? How many minutes a day do you have different activities with your family or your significant other or your friend groups? And how do you schedule that time with them? And things like that. So that's, you can see how we're putting numbers next to interview questions, open-ended questions, where the number is how many minutes or hours a day do you spend with family and friends, and then the open-ended question is how do you schedule that, or does someone else schedule it for you, kind of things like that. And between data and open-ended questions, we can start combining phenomenon together and see how a theory might grow out of that. Ah ha ha, we're starting to see that there's this group of people that, because of their work situation, they start losing out on some of their social life, or because of their social life, improve their work situation. So it's multiple phenomenon working at the same time. Ethnographic is our next qualitative study style, and we're going to look at a definition and an example for this one too. So let's start with the definition right off the bat. An ethnographic study, a qualitative ethnographic study, is designed to understand a group's culture and way of life by observing them. So it's a lot less like getting in there and asking questions, getting there and asking a lot of data, and it's much more about just watching. Watching. You can ask questions, researchers often ask questions, but it's much more about watching and to see how culture, values, ways of life, social norms emerge out of different cultural lines and separations and groups. That some that happen very naturally, like between country groups or people of different points of origin, right? Or some that happened kind of without us seeing it coming, like the example that we have here. A researcher spends time with a group of gamers, watching how they interact, how they communicate, how they build friendships, and they may even join in some gaming sessions and events to better understand that group's behaviors and cultures. Right? So for a gamer's ethnographic group, that researcher is going to just try and like walk in the day of a life of. A lot of documentarians do ethnographic qualitative research. They try to walk through and just, I'm going to try and be one of you guys today, if that's okay with you. I just want to see what it's like. And they take notes throughout the day. They might ask for clarifying questions. They might ask, hey, what's important here? What's important there? Or why was that offensive? Or why did we avoid that situation? And things like that. A lot more questions as to why that come from the natural observation of being in that group. So gamers is one interesting one, but there's other ethnographic groups like Native American cultures that are way under research, but those are one really good way to start that research is with ethnographic qualitative studies. How can we just be in those situations, in those groups? And this qualitative research has a major strength there. Because there are some populations, not just Native American groups, but there are some populations that are really hard to access formally. So if you can get a more informal connection first, hey, I want to hang out with you guys, I want to attend some events, I just want to understand things. That can really bridge the gap or clear the chasm of how do I access this people group. Another example that is really pertinent for where I'm at here in central Kentucky is there's this entire people group of workers who came in with working visas, but then with all of the change that's happening under the Trump administration, don't feel safe like talking to or responding to people from any institution at all until they can figure out what's going on with their visas and their green cards and so on and so forth. That being said, it makes it very hard to get questions answered. It makes it very hard to um, kind of confirm or deny, hey, I want to make an interview. Well, if you interview only a few of us, then we kind of feel like we don't know what's being shared. We don't know if we can trust you. But an ethnographic study, this naturalistic observation, really helps calm down some of those fears, some of those nerves by saying, I just want to go out and work a day in your shoes. I just want to work a work day with you guys. Is that okay? Um, yeah, sure. That we know what work days are safe for us. Or can I have a dinner with you guys and just at your house and stuff like that? That allows for a lot more naturalistic observations to happen with a lot less fear, while still accessing a very difficult to access group. So qualitative ethnographic studies, very unique in their strength. So far we've talked about phenomenological, we've talked about grounded theory, and we've talked about ethnographic studies. Each one of these is usually looking at lots of or quite a few people. It might not be in the hundreds or thousands like some medical research can get to, but we're still looking for a large enough number that we can see patterns and then make questions out of those patterns. But now we're going to move to case study, which has a very different focus, a very different focus. So case study is where we try to study one person or one very specific group of people in incredible detail. Incredible detail. The example that we have here is a researcher studies one super successful student and finds out what makes them very successful, very effective. They can talk to teachers, students, they can observe classes, they might even talk to family and review school data to help understand what helps that student succeed, right? So every person this researcher talks to is all about one high schooler. Every bit of data that is collected is about one high schooler. And there's a lot of trying to find out which part of this data has the most effect, or if there's an interaction between variables that creates a strong effect too. And case studies really helpful. Case studies really helpful for starting questions, starting theories, and really complicated theories too. And in psychology and a few other humanistic areas, it is quite people are quite complicated and quite layered. So having a case study where you do go through every single layer of a person really helps us kind of uncover some potential interactions, potential interpretations, potential variables that we never thought of before. And then we can take all that we learned from that case study and then start making more quantitative studies out of that to try and see if that's something we can expand on, right? So for this example here, talking about a very successful high schooler, if we do a case study on them, we might find variables about how they interact with life, and we might find variables about how they interact with, or how life interacts with them. And then we can start taking some of those variables and asking them more broadly to other high schoolers and other schools to see if that still holds true as an effective high school teaching, training, note taking technique. Just something that makes high schoolers more effective. Is this true to help make all high schoolers more effective or not? But it helps us isolate things by going really in depth about one or two people or an interaction of them. Helps us find variables we probably would not have found alone. Thanks very much for listening in on qualitative research designs. I hope this helped a lot. Take care, you guys.